Recently, I suggested that it's time for Europe to build its own space station in low Earth orbit. But what would be the best orbit for such a station? With Europe and the US clearly diverging, a European space station would not rely on US launch providers or technology. While both regions can and will continue to operate on a transactional basis, including on a future moon base, Europe needs to chart its own strategy for space exploration and development. A sovereign space station would be a good first step. The ISS is due to retire soon, and with NASA's focus on the moon, very little money is allocated to support future commercial space stations. The most likely outcome is that the US will lose access to low Earth orbit in the coming years. With commercial space stations not viable, according to a NASA report, Europe has only one option left if it wants to maintain access to a space station in low Earth orbit: build its own. I'll make the case for a high-inclination orbit for a future European space station. There are compelling reasons for this, which I'll explain in detail. After watching, please drop your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. We'll be discussing them live on the weekend livestream. I host a livestream every weekend recapping this week's videos and space news, reading out lots of comments and chat messages from viewers. I hope you can join us. Before I make the case, let me explain what a high-inclination orbit is. Inclination is the angle between a space vehicle or space station's orbital plane and the equator. So, an equatorial orbit has an inclination of 0 degrees, and a polar orbit has an inclination of 90 degrees. Given countries have fixed launch pads at specific latitudes, orbital inclination could be good or bad for a country. This will be an important issue later on in this discussion. Okay, let's get started. Sovereignty. Europe needs to reduce reliance on US technology and services. We have seen already the US is quite willing to use that dependency against Europe. US service providers from space that could be turned off at the request of the US government include Starlink for communications, Maxar and Planet Labs for Earth imaging, to name a few. In a crisis, the US could shut down or restrict GPS satellites. In short, heavy reliance on US services and technology undermines European sovereignty. The only solution is for a space station to be owned and operated by Europe and its international partners. All critical technology should be developed and manufactured from these countries only. Any US component undermines sovereignty and could be used as leverage in the future. The sweet spot: 60 degrees inclination. So, what inclination is ideal for a space station that's built, operated and maintained in Europe? I propose 60 degrees as the ideal orbital inclination. First, 2 operational spaceports operate at this latitude or higher: SaxaVord in Scotland and Andøya in Norway. Rocket Factory Augsburg and ISA Aerospace, 2 of the 3 major launch players in Europe, operate from these spaceports. Orbital-class rockets could take off from both of these launch sites in the coming months. At SaxaVord, other space startups such as Skyrover, High Impulse and Latitude Space also plan to launch from there. In other words, all commercial launch providers, with a single exception of PLD Space, already have infrastructure or plan to at these 2 spaceports. Even in the case of PLD Space, infrastructure requirements are modest, so they could operate from a European spaceport without incurring high costs. Europe cannot fly from mid-inclination spaceports due to safety risks. Given all of commercial European launch infrastructure is already situated at a latitude of 60 degrees or more, it makes sense to position a space station at that same angle for maximum payload capacity. A direct insertion into the 60-degree inclination orbit is possible from SaxaVord, Europe's most important commercial spaceport, while from Andøya in Norway a minor plane change is required. Europe's medium and heavy lift vehicle Ariane 6 flies from French Guiana, close to the equator. I have a lot to say about the spaceport, but I will leave that for part 2 of this series. International partners. While ESA would be the lead agency for this new space station, it would work alongside politically aligned partners. The two obvious partners for Europe are Canada and Japan. In addition, India could contribute either with hardware or resupply missions. Canada recently increased its payments to the ESA budget by a factor of 10. This will result, over time, in more work done in Canada by Canadian space startups. That's how ESA's geo-return policy works. Every dollar contributed to ESA's budget by Canada will eventually find its way back to the Canadian industry, boosting their space sector and supporting high-paying jobs while contributing to ESA's projects. Canada has 3 startups working on orbital rockets. Nord Space's reusable Titan vehicle, for instance, could deliver over 4 tons to a high-inclination orbit, while Canada Rocket Company's R2 is targeting over 5 tons in reusable mode. In addition, a high-inclination space station would be beneficial to Canada, which has strong interest in the Arctic regions and climate science, as a space station would be perfectly positioned for that type of research. Japan has a long history of cooperating with ESA and has a spaceport and launcher that can support and resupply the station. The Japan module, a proposed successor to the Kibo module on the ISS, is being studied by Japan. Unfortunately, given the likely mass of such a module, it cannot be deployed into a 60-degree inclination orbit from Tanegashima Spaceport in Japan. Instead, a future medium or heavy lift vehicle flying from Europe would be required, or a US vehicle would be needed instead. Benefits of a high-inclination space station. A high-inclination space station, in addition to climate research benefits, also directly supports defense and security of Europe and Canada. It would repeatedly pass over key regions such as Greenland, Canada, the Nordic countries, the North Sea, the UK, and northern Russia. This station would differentiate itself from both the ISS and possible future US commercial space stations and the Chinese Tiangong station, allowing unique research not possible on lower inclination stations. For example, during coronal mass ejections from the Sun, intensive geomagnetic storms are visible over the North Pole region. A space station in a 60-degree orbit is ideally suited to study these events in detail, helping scientists better understand geomagnetic storms and their impact on the space environment and the Earth's atmosphere. Ariane 6. Launch vehicles can boost cargo and crew vehicles into an orbit far from the final inclination, relying on the spacecraft's onboard fuel to efficiently change orbital plane in space. This was the case when Europe launched its ATV vehicle to the ISS from French Guiana, or when SpaceX launches its cargo and crew Dragon vehicles. However, large pieces of infrastructure, such as space station modules, cannot efficiently change orbital planes in space due to their mass. This means that the launch site must be close in latitude to the final orbital inclination. For this reason, Ariane 6 cannot deliver large modules to a 60-degree inclination orbit. In fact, only a Falcon Heavy has a performance margin to do this. For sovereign access to space, Europe cannot afford to use a spaceport far from Europe and at the wrong inclination for most customers who strongly prefer high inclination orbits. Part 2 will cover in more detail the future launch vehicle needs for Europe. European Space Station Layout. Let's flesh out a realistic space station layout that takes full advantage of existing work by European and international partners. I suggest repurposing the iHab module from the cancelled Lunar Gateway station as a core habitation module. This module has already been paid for, largely built, and remains in Europe. To expand living space, I propose adding 2 OHAB inflatable modules based on the design from Spartan Space, a French space startup. From international partners, the Japan module, a proposed successor to the Kibo module, could be added, as is intended for use on future space stations. Canada can contribute the Canadarm3 robotic arm, which was under construction for the Gateway station and would be an excellent addition, providing critical support for assembly, berthing, spacewalks, and adding external infrastructure to the station. Without a future European heavy lift rocket that flies from a high inclination spaceport, these large modules would need to be deployed using SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket because of their mass. In addition to these components, a new power and propulsion unit would need to be developed, and ideally a node module for flexibility and to support multiple visiting vehicles. The OHAB inflatable module would likely expand to 7 meters in diameter. Increasing this to 8 or 9 meters would increase the internal volume significantly and would bring it close to the diameter of a Sierra Space Life module. The estimated habitable volume of this proposed space station is around 550 to 700 cubic meters. This is actually larger than the ISS due to inflatable modules adding a lot of internal space. The large internal volume may be surprising. The reason it's so high is that while the ISS has a pressurized volume of 1005 cubic meters, that's not the same as habitable volume. Due to equipment racks and other internal structures, the volume usable by astronauts is much less. Inflatable habitats use less space for heavy structural components such as walls and don't come with equipment racks. This results in higher habitable volume once expanded, while still being compact enough in its stowed configuration to launch on medium lift vehicles. Final thoughts. This plan for a high-inclination space station supports commercial European launchers while creating a strategic moat to keep out better financed and more mature US competitors. In part 2, we'll cover the launch pad and heavy lift rocket that's needed to deploy and sustain a future space station. Just one final thought before I finish. The US has made it clear that its focus is on the moon. A European-led space station plugs a capability gap and could actually make Europe a stronger partner for the US in the future. The US could barter for access to the station in exchange for European seats on lunar missions, while saving billions of dollars by no longer needing to support and maintain its own space station in low Earth orbit. What do you think of a European-led space station in a 60-degree inclination orbit? Do you believe Europe should build an orbital outpost, given that NASA does not believe commercial space stations are viable? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this space video, consider buying me a coffee to help fund more episodes like this. The link is in the description. Watch the weekly live stream to see the images, clips and slides from this week's videos. It's a live Q&A on this week's space topics where I read out some of the best comments. The more people join, the more fun the live stream is. Be sure to like and subscribe so you will see our upcoming videos. We make videos every week covering the space industry with an emphasis on the smaller space startups that aren't covered so well on other channels. See you soon.